So, hello everyone. I hope you're not like falling asleep because I was falling asleep earlier. So I hope you've had enough coffee and are awake for my talk. If not, I'm going to wake you up. We're going to talk about component-driven repo for a component-driven world. And you're probably all here because you don't really know why you're here, because you kind of don't know even what I'm going to talk about, right? And I'll explain it all. But basically, I'm going to show you how to do component-driven, how to build components, thinking components first, how you can build your components outside of applications, how you can build teams, like have teams' own features, and how you can just basically build better front-end applications. And hopefully you'll go away learning something. That's the aim. I'll show you a demo, show you how I built something, and I'll put the demo code at the end so you can actually scan the QR code and you can see how I built everything. And then don't look at my code because it's not perfect, but you can kind of just see how it all works. So that's what we're all here for. So I hope you enjoy it. And a little bit about me. My name is Debbie O'Brien. I'm head developer advocate at Bit. I will be using Bit to show you how I built what I did. But basically, Bit is an open source tool for building component-driven development. So you'll see it, but I won't really go into actually what Bit does. I'm an open source contributor, speaker, blogger, YouTuber. Isn't everyone a YouTuber these days? Because we just all got stuck at home and decided that was the cool thing to do. And I do a lot of sports, so cycling, running, paddle, skiing, and I'm a 4th-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Those of you who are sitting up close, or those of you who are watching on camera, are probably seeing the big black and blue bruise on my head. I'm probably thinking that, yes, I was in a Taekwondo competition, and it was really cool, and I just got a couple of bashes. And a couple of years ago, that would have been completely correct. And I've had loads of bashes and bumps from Taekwondo. But actually, this one came from walking through a revolving door, getting onto the train at the airport. Because for some reason in Norway, they build revolving doors that are H-shaped. So you walk in, and you intend to walk out, but there's another glass there, and you're meant to go that way. And I went into the glass. The glass survived, and my head didn't. But I'm OK. I survived. And just as well, when in Norway, do like the Norwegians. And as we're going skiing this weekend, I came off the airplane and straight into duty-free to buy alcohol. Because alcohol is ridiculously expensive in this country. And luckily, I had a bottle of cider, so I sat on the train with a bottle of cider on my head, and that helped the lump go down. So that's enough about me. Let's get into things. So we're going to talk about the modern world. The modern web is component-driven, right? If you're building applications, you're probably building in Angular, in Vue, in Svelte, in React, in et cetera, et cetera. Now, who here is a front-end developer? Nice, quite a few of you, very cool. Who here is a back-end developer? Okay, back-end is winning. Who's a full stack? Oh, I love that. Everyone just becomes full stack. It's great. Full stack is the new in thing, right? A couple of years ago, full stack was like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. You just are not qualified in anything, so you do everything. And now full stack is like the in thing, so that's very cool. And if you're here, in your DevOps, you're probably in the wrong talk. No, I'm only messing. You're very welcome as well if you're project managers, designers, whatever. This talk is kind of also for anyone, but mainly dealing with front end. And also the back ends are going to learn what the front end is doing. So that's also kind of cool. So the modern web is component driven. And we're all living in a perfect world, right? Or are we? I mean, COVID happened, so no. But when it comes to applications, this is basically how we're building applications in the front end in 2021. What happens is COVID came along, and that meant, we need to scale. Everything went online. We needed to build more and more and more applications. We hired more people. We got more developers on board. And everything is just thrown in together, and we have this one big, massive mess in the front end. So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's see, where it all started. And some of you, I'm looking, some of you are as old as me, and some of you are so young you won't even know this. But, if we go back in time, this is how it started, right? We had monoliths where we had PHP, jQuery, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, throw it all into the one application, ship it and go. Is there anyone still working like this with front and back end code all mixed together? No. Thank God, because I would have said, you need a new job. So, yeah, this is how we used to work. And this is basically what we did, right? We separated front and back. It's pretty simple, right? Back end, you go do your stuff. You want to do .NET, do .NET. You want to do PHP, do PHP. We don't care. And front end, we want to do React or Vue or Angular. And the back end, you do your stuff, we do our stuff, and we're all happy, right? Perfect situation. So the back end got all clever on us, didn't they? And they went, oh, we're going to build microservices. And they started splitting up their back end monolith into these wonderful microservices and doing all cool stuff. And the front end is basically here. Excuse my art is not very good, so just push that in. But you can see how it's just changed, right? And the front end is still that big, massive monolith, that big, massive stone of code. All the code is just in there. So yeah, microservices. What are microservices? If there's anyone back end here, you could probably write these slides better than me, because I'm a front end developer, so don't quote me on all this. But more or less, this is what microservices are. It arranges the application as a collection of loosely coupled services. We've got split in terms of responsibility or knowledge. We got incremental updates, independent deployments, right? We got smaller code bases, because they're micro. And we can scale a lot easier. And that's what we're doing in the back end, or that's what the back end teams are doing, most of them. And we're not doing that in the front end at all. The front end is basically still a monolith. It's still a mess. And you're probably thinking, but hang on a minute, I'm building React applications, they're modern. So, I'm doing everything right. This is how React tells you to do it, how Vue tells you to do it, how Angular tells you to do it. So what are you talking about, Debbie? Well, your components are tightly coupled and nested inside your application. And when you're building your applications, you're building that one app, and you're building your components right inside that app. Am I right? Yeah? Yeah, the majority of you are basically building apps. I mean, that's how we're taught to do it, right? You create React app and you start building all the components in there, unless you're building kind of component libraries, which some of you might be. But in general, this is how we're building applications. So that means that we end up with basically a front-end monolith. We have one code base, and we've got no team ownership. Now you might say, okay, yeah, but you could do like code owners from in GitHub, and you could like separate some folders that people can own that, etc. But it's still, you have still access to kind of like the whole code base. Just on pull request, you might not have full access. We've got one version and too many components, and it's very hard to scale when you have a lot of components in one code base. And you've got one build, right? So every time you want to update one component, you're basically building the whole application because of that component. So it's kind of slow to develop and move forward. And what happens when you need to scale to multiple applications, right? We now need to build, I don't know, a mobile application or a secondary application or some sort of back-end type of application for the login facility or whatever. So we now need to scale to multiple apps. What do we do, right? We've built this amazing app and it's really cool, but all our components are stuck inside the app. So we kind of say, right, we've got these three similar applications, and some of the components could be the same, like shopping cart components, kind of really big components. And, what do you do? Anyone, what do you do? You duplicate the component, don't you? I know you do, I see you. Yeah, I mean, who here has duplicated components? Yeah, okay, excellent. So half the people here are duplicating components. I've done the same, because it's literally like you have a booking engine component, and you need to use it now in this other app. What is the quickest and easiest solution? Copy, paste, put it in there. Because, basically, like that code is never going to change, right? It's always going to be the same. So you're never going to have to maintain anything, right? But then they come along and they change things, and things happen. So now when you duplicate the components, you've got a lot of code to maintain. And you can have inconsistency across your application, because obviously, if one team is working on one and the other on another, one is going up in a different direction and the other's starting to look out of control. And if you've ever seen some websites where the button component is different on different pages, the header component, the footer component, yeah, it's real. So inconsistency is a massive problem when you're duplicating your components. Or you're reinventing the wheel, right? Because you take that component and then you're just kind of building on top of it again and again. Whereas, you really just want to have one component. And updating components over multiple apps is very, very time consuming. And I know one company, which I will not say the name, that we're working with, that basically took them 6 months to update the logo component. across all their applications and websites across every single country in the world. Now you might say, that's ridiculous, right? But how do you update a component on a large scale corporation, right? Where you have to go through certain project managers and all these things. And by the time you go through each of them, and then you finally updated the logo. Now you might say, but who updates their logo, right? Well, we do. On Pride Day, we put a Pride logo. Christmas, we might put a Christmas logo. So logos do change, things change. And basically, we need to make it simple to make one change and bang, it's changed across every application. That's the ideal world. So another solution is packaging components, right? And you might say, hey, I never duplicate my components. I take them, put them in a package, stick them up in NPM, and happy days. And yeah, I've done that as well in the past. But it's also, when you do one component, it's kind of, okay, pretty good. And then you do another one, and then you do another one, and then you do another one. And you've got all these package JSONs to manage. And it can be an absolute nightmare to manage. And of course, there are tools to help you with that. You've got Learner, for example. Anyone used Learner? Yeah? So Learner's, it's okay, I'm not going to say anything bad against Learner. It does its job, but it's not basically doing what it's meant to do, or it's what we want it to do, right? So Learner isn't the perfect solution, but can work. If it makes you happy and you're happy, then stick with it. But you've got to manage all those package JSONs, all those dependencies, and that can be a bit of a nightmare. Updating dependencies, I don't know if you like doing that, but no, I don't like doing that. It's also very hard to discover components. I don't know if you've ever gone to NPM and started to try and find a component. NPM wasn't made for components, right? So you don't have a nice UI of seeing the components, which means if you're a company that has 300 components on NPM, and then a new junior dev comes in and you say, okay, so our library is in NPM, go find the components and start using those components. It's pretty difficult to work with. Now, I know you're going to say, yeah, but we build component libraries and we build our own component library shop, and then we have one package, and then we just download that one package, and then we use that in all our apps, which is another solution. I built that as well. But then, you're sending that package up each time you make one change. You've got to, send that package up again and again and again. And unless you've got really good tree shaking going on with Webpack and stuff, you've got all these components in there that you don't need. So it's not the ideal solution. So monorepos is another solution, right? I've got an idea, let's just throw all the code in one, and then we can easily share our components across all applications. If we want to scale to multiple applications, we can have 3 repos in there, 3 applications in there. Anyone here working in monorepos? Okay, quite a lot of you. Keep your hands up if you like monorepos. Okay, quite a lot of you. That's interesting. Hands up if anyone hates monorepos. A few of you. Okay, good. So it's an interesting battle here. I'm going to show you. I'll show you the pros and cons, and I don't really have an opinion, but I'll tell you what I kind of found out from other people. So monorepos do have a lot of pros. They improve velocity, right? It's very quick to develop because you've got all access to all components, all code. So it's really easy. Take that button component, shopping cart component, throw it in each application. Happy days. Great. So we can share code, reuse code very, very, very easily. And the dev experience is actually pretty good, right? Because, we have access to everything, so we don't have to ask permission or clone another repo or do anything. We have everything right at our feet, so it's pretty good experience. And refactoring at large scale is really, really easy because we have access to all the code, right? So if we need to fix the button component and the cart component together, we can do that. We can refactor everything very easily. And we can work across different teams. So we have one team that's, working on the shopping cart and another team that's working on design components. They're all working in the one monorepo, and they're all happy, kind of, maybe. And we have standards, right? So you've got only one ESLint to sort out, one prettier file. So everyone's working across the same standards. So monorepos are pretty good, right? So all those who have your hands up, you're probably loving all this, right? And the cons, well, nothing is ever perfect. So the tooling basically isn't perfect for monorepos. Learner wasn't really built, for monorepos. It's just built to help you manage packages and stuff. So the tooling really isn't built for it, the same as Git isn't built for it. Try git clone on a massive, massive project, and you're waiting for ages to clone that project. And now you might say, yeah, but GitHub have come up with that solution, and now we've got like code spaces, and that's like in the cloud, and that's much faster, and it's very true, and that's why GitHub built it, because cloning projects take so long. So now they don't have to spend so long when a new person comes on the team. But yeah, the tooling isn't really built for monorepos. Visibility and discoverability is hard. Now, you're going to say, yeah, but it's easy to find components, you said, right? It is in the code, but you're working in VS Code, for example. You do a search for a component, and you find that component, but you can't really visualize and see that component. You're just seeing the code, and you kind of know it exists, but you don't really know how it looks like, what it does. You're really having to read the code. So discovering the components on how they look and feel is kind of hard, because you're just like, going in through the code. It's very easy to break someone else's code, right? I don't know if you've ever broken someone else's code, but I have. So yeah, you kind of don't know who's using that component, who's relying on it. So it's very easy to make some changes, and then all hell breaks loose, and it's a disaster. Onboarding developers is also quite hard. If you take a new developer, it doesn't have to be a junior developer, it could be a very senior developer, comes into your code base, and basically you say, right, you're going to work on the shopping cart component, but there's like 400 components in there, or could be even more than that. There's a lot of code in there, and they've got to find their way around. Whereas really, if they just had one thing to look at, one thing to work out, like the shopping cart, just that, it would be a lot easier. So yeah, onboarding can be time consuming. And then you've got slow builds because you're building, so much. But then you might say, yeah, but we've got like NX, and that solves some of the problems with caching and stuff, and it does. The NX has done a great job at that. Anyone using NX? Yeah, so that solves some of those problems, and it's pretty cool. But again, it's still not the perfect solution. Team boundaries and ownership isn't there. Like I said, you could do code owners in GitHub, but it's very difficult to say, don't touch that code until it goes through the pull request stage, and that stage might be too late. So there's no kind of this is this team, they own this code, and this is this team, they own that code. So kind of sounds like I hate monorepos, but it's not. That's not really. I kind of said, I don't know, do you love or hate monorepos? I asked Twitter, because Twitter has all the answers, right? So yeah, Twitter came back to me, and they kind of said some interesting things. Like Garrett says, I only have experience in one, but we managed to end up in a situation where every consuming repo has to import every package in the monorepo. So we have the crappy tooling and bloat of a monorepo and none of the claim benefits. Oliver said he's a huge fan, he loves them, but the tooling hasn't helped. Solutions like Learner were hamstrung by the NPM client's limitations. And Brandon, who actually works at NX, said he loves the shared code between apps and libraries, the visibility, the collaboration, the consistency, the ability to standardize single package versions. That's what we want. But he hates the insufficient tooling, which makes the experience bad. It can lead to bloated CI times and lots of ad hoc scripts. And if you look at all these, the three things that they have in common, not my words, these guys' words, the tooling hasn't helped. Crappy tooling, insufficient tooling. So that's the aim of what we need to fix today. We need to fix the tooling. If the tooling is better, we can do a better job, right? Now, this is if we're kind of scaling across multiple applications. You might be saying, yeah, but I'm only building one application. So, I'm just building in one way. So I don't really need that. Maybe I don't need to share components across, different repos. Okay, cool, fine. If you're scaling one app, then you probably have this one large app. Again, like I said before, everyone's working on that massive code base. It's hard to discover your components. It's hard to give teams ownerships. It's still one main branch that you're working on. Okay, you're going to branch off for your features and stuff, but it's still one main branch that you're going to deploy. You have no internal versioning for any of your components. You only have a version at the app level. And you have one long build time because you're building the app all the time, to add in every time you're making one small change to a component. And then you're managing multiple deployments. So basically, you still have the same problem as the monorepos, right? The same kind of problems. And that's what we're trying to solve here today. So let's break down the front-end monolith once and for all. That's what we're going to do. That's what I'm going to show you how to do. So, are you ready? First of all, what we need to do is let teams own features. This is the ideal world, right? If you could build and work in the ideal world, This is what we want to do. We want teams to own features so that they come in and say, this is what I work on. I'm the shopping cart team, for example, and that's all I care about, is making sure that that shopping cart component and everything that it needs works and is okay. And someone else who's building whatever, they can do whatever and work on whatever, and I don't want to know about it because it's not my responsibility. So we break this down. We could have different teams, like a support team, for example. So we get the support team, and they have a support request component that they own and they work on. That could be a form, for example. Then they might have an online chat widget, to chat with the people for support, and they own that component as well. And then they might have the support tickets, right? That's another component they own. That could be a whole page. That's a big component. Remember, components, pages are also components. And a support ticket dashboard, that page is also theirs. Now that's the support team. How many developers are on that support team, that's their components, and that's what they're responsible for, and that's what they're going to build. And you might have a product team. And the product team could have a shopping cart component, the get product component, the hook, for example, a React hook is also a component. They might have the product card component that shows all the products, and the product page that shows all those product cards. So that's what they're responsible for. And then you've got the design team, right? The design team could have the button component, famous button that's used everywhere across every single application. The card component, which might just be a shape with a border so that all cards kind of look the same and feel the same. It doesn't have to have anything inside it. And then you might have the logo component, right? This is used across your application, maybe in the support tickets, in the header and the footer, et cetera, et cetera. And it could be a tooltip component, that's used across your application. So the design team works on those components. And then basically you have the solution where you have these three teams, and they're doing their job independently, building their components independently. Support team takes their components and puts them up to the support scope. The product team takes their components and they put them up to the product scope. And the design team, they make their components and they send them up to the design scope. Now you're going to say, what's a scope, right? And, some people do know what a scope is, scope of ice cream. It could be many things. Scope can mean a lot of things. A scope is basically a next-gen microservice allowing teams to own and expose APIs that include both front-end APIs, back-end APIs, and even node modules. That's my definition. I'll show you, though. So this is how I'm building with scopes, right? And we have basically just a load of scopes are a load of you could say domain-driven development kind of things. Like you're thinking of your domain, that's your scope. So we could have a base UI as a scope. This is kind of like the projects I built. Some of them are terrible. Some of them are amazing. So look at the amazing ones only. But yeah, you could have the base UI, the design. I've got e-commerce in there, the shoe store. I built a perfume store, electronics store. They're all different scopes. So just to give you an idea, yeah, that's the base UI one. And that's what I'm going to show you how we built the demo project that I built. I used the base UI and the e-commerce and the shoe store. They're three separate teams that built these. Now, basically, you're probably seeing my picture on all of those. That's because I have nobody on my team. I know it's very sad. But normally, you would have different teams owning that. So you've got to just imagine that actually that's built with different teams. But I actually had to build everything. But we are hiring, in case you want to join me. So yeah, every scope can have its own repo, right? So Base UI has its own repo. Now, Base UI is not an application. Base UI is just design components or base components that I'm reusing across every application. E-commerce is a repo with just e-commerce components, no application, just components that are then being built and used to create the e-commerce applications. I have 4 applications because I felt like building 4 different shops. And then I've got those 4 applications built as separate repos. And you can kind of visualize it like this. So you can kind of see, which scope depends on who, what their dependencies are, how they're connected, and how they're, using things. So you could also, maybe see that, something isn't using the e-commerce components, and then you'd be like, whoa, hang on a second, you built this application, you didn't build it with the e-commerce components. That's a problem because now we're duplicating components. So you can kind of see how they're all connected together. So when it comes to teams, basically how we want teams to work is that teams you want teams to own features, right? You want to own your work, don't you? You want to go to work and say, I do this is mine. I want to ship it, deploy it, and then go home on a Friday and not worry about anyone else. I want to work independent from the other people. They're doing their great job. Like, we love the other team, but, let them do their job. I want to do my job with my team. I have my deadlines and get my job done. And you want to have separate build pipelines, right? I don't want to have to build on a Friday, everyone build on a Friday and ship it all on a Friday. I used to do that. That was a terrible decision. Who makes decisions like that? So yeah, build pipelines, you want them to have separate so that you can build that shopping cart and just build that one, and someone else is building those base components, which could be the button components or the logo component, and they can deploy them separately and not have to wait for one team to finish. And you want to be able to test them independently as well, which is also very important. I hope you're all writing tests. Are we all writing tests? Not really? Kinda? Maybe? Yeah. We should all be writing tests. I'm not writing tests. I'm writing sometimes. I'm trying, but it is hard. We should write more tests. And yeah, we want to ship the components individually. So that components, they're shipped, they're done. And, then we just want to work on our own, have autonomy, and like I said, on a Friday, go home and have beers. And if the other team didn't do their job, then yeah, their problem, not my problem. Cool. So that's what we want. Is anyone actually working like this at the moment? One person, excellent. 2 people, cool. I want to speak to you later, see what you're doing. So 2 people out of a whole room are doing, 3, didn't see you. Okay, 4, we got 4. 4 people are working like this, excellent. And the rest of you are not. Shame on you. No, don't worry. I'm going to help you sort your lives out. So apps are composed from components, right? We all know that thing. Our applications, we're just composing them from components. So this is a dependency graph from the e-commerce store I created, showing all the components that are used to build up that application. It shows you how they're all connected together. I know it's a bit small, but just to give you the idea of the tree, and it kind of goes quite a long way away because there's quite a lot of components used to build up that e-commerce application. Now, my e-commerce store is beautiful, I know. This is what it looks like. And pretty much everything is, and we lost connection. Damn. I lost connection here. Did you lose connection? Okay, it's back here. Is it back there? Excellent. Okay. Sometimes the Mac did that. I did that at the last conference. It just shut off for 10 seconds. Okay, so we're back. So yeah, we have basically the e-commerce application here. And the logo is coming from the base UI scope or base UI repo, depending on how you want to think about it. And then we have the e-commerce components. They're coming from the e-commerce scope or e-commerce repo, depending on how you want to think about it. And then we have the shoe store, which also has its own components, because you might want a hero component that's specific to the shoe store that, the e-commerce team, you don't want them to own it because you want to basically own it yourself and kind of change it, modify it, and build it, differently to how the other e-commerce stores are being built, etc. So it's a matter of deciding how you want to who should own your components, right? And that's, when you're building them, that's how you should think about it. So to do component-driven, it basically means it's a reuse-based approach to defining, implementing, and composing loosely being the word, loosely coupled independent components into systems, right? So we want to try and loosely couple. Now, you should say just decouple them completely, right? But sometimes you will have some coupling to components, and that's okay. But you don't want to have heavily coupled components, which I know I have in my app, so that's not good in my previous apps. Now I do things right, because I learned the right way. But yeah, when you're building your components, so this is my beautiful shoes card component where I sell shoes on my e-commerce site. And this is basically built up from a card component, right? This is kind of, you're probably all going, Debbie, we know all this. We do the same. I know. Just bear with me. So we've got the card, and then we break it down. We've got a heading component. And now you might not do that. You might be just throwing a H2 in there. But actually, if you make the H2 a component that's now a heading component, it means if you were to modify anything across your application, that one small component will be modified, and it's just a lot easier. And then you've got a text component. So this would be your general text or paragraph or whatever. An image component. Now you might say, well, we don't need an image component because we just use the image tag and you're just putting source in there and an alt in there and maybe lazy loading, right? And I would kind of agree with you. And then I would say, yeah, but then, I used to work at Nuxt. I don't know if you know Nuxt from the Vue frameworks. But Nuxt just released their Nuxt image module. And basically what that does is it kind of gives you better performance of your images. So now in my personal website, which I have like, I don't know, about 150 image tags. That was fun. To wake you all up, I like that. I have about 150 image tags, and now I've got to refactor my whole application to use the next image, because the next image tag is a lot more performant. It's going to allow me to have better performance, and I can change widths and heights depending on mobile versions, etc. And I know there's one for Next for Gatsby as well, right? So there are reasons why, if you had done this out as just an image component, now you just make one change and you got that change across your whole application. You might have to modify the API a little bit, but and then you've got the button component. Again, the button component is one of the most used components across any application. So that's in there. And then you've got the currency component. Again, you might say, yeah, but why would you need a currency component? But you might want to say, yeah, but I just want them to have dollars and, I don't know, British pounds, for example. We might be going into the UK market, and then all of a sudden we go to the Euro market. You want to allow them to use the Euro, etc. And yeah, basically then you want to be able to see the components. So here we've got like the components where we're able to kind of see everything running, where every component is coming from. And as you can kind of scroll down, you can see, and you can actually click and go direct to that component. And what that allows you to do is it allows project managers to actually see that, yes, you're using the components from the correct scopes, from the correct repos. It allows designers to see that they're coming there. You can kind of get inconsistencies, see them beforehand and say, actually, that component should not come from there. And you can also see, so maybe you want to look at some of the a card component and say, whoa, I want to use that component. Where is it? How can I find it? And you could like see and visualize it and then click directly onto that component. So yeah, the shopping cart, the product card component looks pretty much like this. Pretty simple one, and it just has these kind of dependencies. So I can see exactly how that's made up from the dependency graph, what versions of each of those components that it's using. So I think my button's on version 2. I'll show you that later because I've made a much better button. The first button was terrible. So yeah, you can see that this e-commerce site is using the shopping cart or the button from version 2, but another one is actually using the button from version 1, etc. And you can kind of see what's going on. And yeah, I made lovely graphics as well to show you. So that's coming from the base scope. This one is the shoe store scope. That's I built the product card for the shoe store in the actual shoe store because I wanted that shoe store team to basically own that product card and kind of like take it a little bit further into a direction that's different. But if you go into the actual component details, they're actually still using the entity component from the e-commerce. So they're taking that entity component, but they're extending it and adding things like shoe size, because the perfume store did not need shoe sizes. So it's taking all those types, all those entities, and then just extending on top of it, which means if I modify something in the e-commerce, I'm going to get those benefits in the actual shoe store, but still have my shoe size and colors and whatever else the shoes have that the perfume store doesn't need. So yeah, we're still reusing things from other components, but we have our own ownership of that component. And then the currency component is coming from the e-commerce. I don't think the shoe store team needs to own the currency because, it's fine. E-commerce can own that and they can, decide if we're going to go into different markets, etc. So how do we actually build component-driven, right? That's the question, right? Anyone have an answer to this? Does anyone think they are building component-driven? Anyone building component-driven? Okay, we've got one person, two, one, no, one person. Okay, cool. I'm going to have a chat with you later. We'll have lots to talk about. This is cool. So I used to think I was building component-driven. I was like, I'm building components until I changed jobs. And then my CEO had a chat with me and he's like, Debbie, no, that is not how you do things. I'm like, really? But I've been doing that forever. Seriously? Yeah, but basically what you need to do is think about every component as a product for anyone to use. Now, I definitely did not build my components thinking like that. I was building them simply for me. I was actually just I would build a whole product card component and then like take a button out and make it a component and take something out and make it a component anytime I felt it was needed to be reused. But I never started thinking of small pieces as individual components. And I never considered anyone else was going to use my components because why would they want to use my components, right? But, when you work for big teams, big enterprises, a lot of people are using your components. So your component basically should have a great developer experience. I mean, that's what you want. You want developers to be happy, to love what you're doing. So this is really important. You want them to be able to use them in different contexts, like throw different themes on top so they can be styled different, can look different. They should be easy to use, right? Your components, it should be very easy for someone to take your component and use your component. The API should be really well explained so you can see what's available to you and then be able to just, use it and see what you can do with that component. And it should be loosely coupled, right? So like, data, etc. Try and use, not coupled to stores and things like that. And once you do that, then you're going to have developers who are going to write better software, right? If developers write better software, they're just happier, which is kind of cool. We want developers to be happier. But they are going to write more maintainable software, right? It's going to be much easier to maintain. It's going to be much easier to test. I know you all love testing, but it is going to be much easier to test. And the dev experience is going to be great. And then organizations, what are they going to get? Of course, organizations are going to get better software because the developers are writing better software. They're also going to be happy developers. And they're going to save a lot of time, right? Because you're not like rebuilding multiple components, etc. So organizations are going to save time and they're going to save money, and that's what they care about, right? So organizations, your bosses are going to be happy if you walk in there and say, I'm going to build component-driven. And you're going to have happier devs. And once we all have happier devs, life is just so much better, right? So that's what we're trying to do. Now, component-driven, we take your components and we basically want to make them themable. You want your components to be able to use in different applications and let different teams be able to throw a different theme on there and have it look a little bit different or whatever. You want them to be composable, so you can compose components on top of other components. You want them to be encapsulated. You want them to be independent from any other. And you want them to be reusable. You want your components to be able to be reused across multiple and many applications. So to give you an example from something I created, themable, we all know what themable is, right? Design components with themes, so they can be used differently in other apps, right? Basically straightforward. And this is just my example here of my two product cards from the shoe store and then from the perfume store. Same component, exactly the same, minor change, and we've got two very different components. I know there's a line underneath the image and the pink thing. Don't look at that. I'll fix it tomorrow. Then we've got composable, right? So you want your apps to basically compose. You want to be able to compose smaller components together to build more complex components, right? We kind of already talked a little bit about it. And this is basically the product card that we saw earlier. And that's those smaller components, completely independent components that are used to build up that component, that one product card component. So when I build my application, I just want to take the product card component in, and the product card component thinks and deals with, all those other components. They just are automatically part of it. So I don't have to include all these little ones. I'm just including that one complex composed component. So encapsulated exposes interfaces which allow the caller to use its functionality. And we want to hide details of internal variables and state. So basically, we want to be able to, use props, right? If you're using kind of building front end, you want to be able to have them use a prop for title, prop for text, prop for source, for alt, and build out your component, the API of the component, thinking of how they can change things, what they can change. Maybe the currency, maybe you want them to change any and have any currency, or maybe you want to only have dollars and euros because maybe, Brexit and, we don't want to have to deal with pounds anymore because they're doing their own thing. So yeah, you can basically choose how do you want to build that API, and you have to think about that when you're actually building the component. And then you want the component to be independent. So if components are independent, they basically have their own version and their own revision history, which means you should be able to go back in time at any moment and, use an older version if you needed to. And it should have its own revision history, so you can go back in time and see, how it kind of changed, what's happening to that component, etc. And they should have their own build pipelines so that basically you can build that component and then just, build it independently from anything else. And then you want to have minimal dependencies on other components. Obviously, you want to consume components, but you don't want to be dependent on other kind of bigger components. If this breaks, this is going to break, etc. And yeah, this looks something like this. Each component has its own version, and you can see here the card is on version 0.11, and the image is on the same version, and the button's on version 2.03, etc. And then you want the components to be reusable. So basically, you want to be able to reuse them in different scenarios in the same or in different applications, depending on what you're building, who you're working for, and what you're doing. So again, just a very simple example. The button component is used in the product card, and it's used in that hero component. Again, obviously, it'd be used much more across the application in many different places, but just kind of see what's going on. Now, when you're building your component, I'm just going to take a button component, which is just can be a very simple component, but can also be a very complex component. But this is how you want to build your components, right? Now, you want to document components so that when someone comes along, they can actually see what your component can do. If you're documenting it, you also want to add your designs in there as well. So your designs can come directly from Figma. So if your designer changed anything, you can then have your compositions right under the designs. So you can see exactly what's going on and if they're the same. And so can the designer, the project manager. You want to have all your API props in there so you can see what is available to you and what you can use. And you want to give people like, a little kind of a live playground so you can play around with it and see it in real time and change it. And, what would happen if I remove something? What would it look like if I added this in? The link is a component there. What if I remove that and added it in as a secondary button, etc.? How would it look and how would it behave? So if you provide someone with this kind of information, they can really trust your component. Then they can open and see every single way that component can be composed. So they can kind of see like, okay, this component gives me everything I want. We've got like tests that are like documentation features because they really kind of test everything that button does. And you can see, does it depend on anything? And you can also see the code, which is really important. So I can actually see that it's using Sass, and I can see who built it, what the code is like, and actually see, do I really trust this component, this developer? Did they write good code? And then I want to see the version history, which means I can then go back in time to see every single version of that component. And, I'll show you a component from when I started. Don't judge me. I was only a learner then. And I built, you can see my documentation from the first time I built this component. It's very different, right? It's not very good. I had no designs in there. I learned the hard way. My boss said, Debbie, come on, you can do better than this. So the designs were terrible. But, maybe you want to still use those designs because maybe you might have, you can see it's much nicer now. I did get a designer to come along and help though. But yeah, you might have two applications that are on different designs for different reasons. I know a company in Australia well, I'll tell you that in a second. Here you can see how you can install the component using Bit, using NPM, or using Yarn, so you can easily use it in any of your projects. But yeah, I know a company that was basically updating their applications slowly. So they couldn't update all the components at once because then one application, wasn't ready to use that component, etc. So being able to have version 1, version 2 meant they could just keep one on Tailwind and the other on Sass, etc. And then once they were ready and had finished every team was ready, they could just then, change and use the other version. So that's basically what you want to do. So that means then basically what we're doing is we're decoupling all our everything, right? We're getting all our components here. This is how the e-commerce store is made up, this shoe store application. These are all the components that are now independent components, and they're used to build up this application. And this is what it looks like on GitHub, right? We have the base UI repo there. We have the e-commerce repo, the stores repo, and there's more in there. And we could have more repos in there. Now, for all of you who love monorepos, you're saying, yeah, but I love working in monorepos, right? And that's cool, because you can still work in a monorepo, right? And that's totally up to you. That's how you want to work. I actually started building this whole thing in a monorepo because it was easier. Yeah, and I didn't have to work in different repos, and it made sense. But then as it scaled, it was like, okay, this is getting hard to manage. I'm taking on other people now into the team, so I want to start separating it out. And you can do that. You can change. You can start in a monorepo. Basically, everything is independent, so all the components are independent. What's important is the scope. When you're building, it's kind of like the domain-driven development thinking, right? When you build thinking about where your component should live in a scope, the repo does not matter because you can change that and move it to another repo without any problems. But the scope is important. That's going to be the package name that you use to install that component later. That cannot change, or you'll break everything, or you can get around it. You can remove it and re-add it and do things like this. But you want to kind of think about that first. So yeah, you can still work in your monorepos, or you can work in multi-repos by basically, this is my next step, what I did, I took the base UI components out, I gave them their own repo, I gave the e-commerce their own repo, and then I put all my applications into one monorepo, and that worked as well. And then the kind of applications got bigger and bigger and stuff, so then I basically had decoupled code bases. And now everything is in its own repo. Now, which one is correct? There's absolutely no correct and no incorrect one. Anything that you do when it comes to like how you want to work, it's up to you and what works best for you or for your teams. So if you want to work in monorepos, polyrepos, or decoupled code bases, it depends on what you want to do. But you can start off, I would start off as a monorepo and then kind of like think and kind of separate it out as you need it. So basically, yeah, this is, these are the scopes, what it looks like, and you can kind of see how you scroll down through each scope. You can see the components that are available to you. This is a movies one as well that we created, and you can basically just like see at all times what components are available, how they look like, and you can search and filter for them, etc. So components are very easily visible, which is what you want. You want your developers to find the components so they can then go and open those components, check out the code, check out the tests, check out what it looks like, and then decide, you know, yes, that's the component that I want to use. We also have like configs in there, like ESLint as a component, Prettier as a component, so that if you're working across multi-repos or decoupled code bases, you can share the ESLint config as a component. You just open your ESLint in that like application or in the development environment of your components in that workspace, and then you just add that one component, that ESLint, and then if you modify that ESLint, you just modify it once and everyone's got the same ESLint, you know, like no console, and then like, you know, you can just like break everyone's app at the same time, which is cool. You're gonna put no console logs in my apps. So yeah, you can have your prettiers and your ESLint as a component. Everything can be a component, right? That's what we wanna, I want you to walk away here, and like if you never, you know, do what I'm doing or whatever, just always think everything can be a component, and if you think like that, you can really like break anything down. So yeah, compose components to create applications. That's what we want to do. We want to build independent components, and then we want to just compose and create applications. And if you do that, like you can actually just build so much faster. And I've tested out, I've like built quite a lot of stuff now, and it really does make a difference. So this one here is my shoe store that you'll be able to see. I'll share the demo with you so you can see it. And these are the composition of the shoe store. And you can highlight over every single component there to see exactly where it's coming from, what scope it's coming from, what repo it's coming from, and basically just see how it's all made up, which means anyone else can come along here and actually just like, you know, see how it's built. So you can, you know, learn from it or say, wow, you're using that component from that place, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, you want to be able to see at each time how they're built up and how it's created. And then you want to just reuse those components in any app. So I've got, you know, this beautiful shoe store, and then I made a electronic store selling headphones, and obviously that button is a lot uglier because I haven't updated it. That's using an older version of the button. I think it's on version 1 point something. It's in between the start and the finished one. And then like I've got a beautiful perfume store. Don't try and buy anything because the demo doesn't like allow you to buy anything, so don't get too excited. If you want to give me money, you can give me money, but it doesn't work. It will work in a couple of weeks. I'm working on it. And then, yeah, you could build like just a sports store. So you can build different stores very quickly. Now, I'm one person working on this, and I was able to build multiple stores super quick. I know a company in Australia that are building multiple applications, and they were just like, there's a whole like video of him explaining how they did what they did with a very small team, and just like they were like, wow, how quickly they were able to build things. The problem is how you start it, right? If you start it right and think about components at the start, you can do anything. But obviously, if you just build one application and just throw all your components in the app, then you've got all that problem of like, now how do I scale, etc. So yes, start with decoupling, start thinking about how you want to build your components, how you want things to be, and think about how teams, you know, which teams should own which components, what scopes they should be in. Think about everything, think about the APIs, and then decide, right, now that can be in its own repo, etc., and that can just, you know, make your life easier. And everything in these repos, so the sports store, for example, is using the components from each of these repos, and I'm using Bit to install them. You could use NPM to install them. You could use Yarn to install them. You could actually go to this repo, and you can create your own shoe store, taking all my components and just Yarn add or NPM install and just use all those components. So that's kind of cool. Component-driven basically means that the components are truly isolated. They're scoped to a particular team, so everyone has their own components to work on, their own job to do. They're independently versioned, as I showed you. They're independently released, so you're releasing components when they're finished, when they're ready, and they're no longer coupled to an app, unless you particularly want them to be, and that's, maybe you want that, and that's also cool, but they shouldn't be coupled to an app. You can still build them in the app, so you could still open a Next.js application, for example, and then, put the components in there and reuse them in another application, and they might live in that, Next.js application, but they're still not coupled to it because they're independent. But it might make sense to put them in a repo separate, but again, up to you how you want to build. And then they can be consumed in the app, in any app, and in many apps. And something I didn't mention, but I'll mention here, so when we're talking about, those repos and how teams are working, so you can also take, it's kind of like a difference between a package and a component, right? So when we talk about independent components, we're talking about the component and the source code is shipped with the component. So if we're working on a team, for example, me and David are working on a team together, and he goes on holiday, and he broke something in his code, and he went on holiday because that's what he does, and now we've got this, problem, and we're kind of I work on a different team, but I could fix his component. I'm in a different code base. I'm in a different workspace. Now, what do? I could clone the repo and then change that component. But I hate cloning repos. I'm still just in my code base. I want to stay in my code base. So I can just import the component in. I will get all the source files. Right? It won't go into NPM, into node modules. It will go into actually my workspace, into VS Code. I have access to all that code, and then I can make that change. I can fix that bug that David broke, and then I can basically tag a new version, export it back into the scope, and then I can say, I do not want David's component in my code base, so I just eject it, and bang, he comes back from holiday, and then he does a git, whatever, and it's oh, you've got a new version, and he just imports, and he's got that new changes that I made. So that's a kind of cool thing, and the main difference between when you're working with packages and when you're working with components, right? You want to be able to modify things. So yes, we want to say goodbye to the monoliths. That's what we're here to do today. The backend is going to work with microservices. Obviously, if they need it, maybe it's a small backend they don't, but if it's a massive project, they probably need microservices. And the front end, whether you need it or not, you should build with independent components, because then if you do have to scale, if things, change in the future, you are already set up to do it. I built my website not like this. I built my website, which is amazing, by the way. But if I now decide to build a streaming website to, share all my YouTube stuff and my streaming, I have to either, start from the beginning or duplicate my components or whatever, because they're all built in the app. So I've seen that I can't scale my own app, and that's just me personally. So imagine a massive company and big team of people. So yes, basically what we want to do is break down that monolith. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to see everything, this is the demo project. You can scan it. You can check it out. There is a README component I created which shows the GitHub repo, so you can click easily to that, so you can see I'm not making all this up. You can clone it. You can play with it. It's completely open source. Bit is open source, and everything, all my components, they're not amazing, but they're also open source, and you're free to use them. I might break them, so be careful. And yeah, Bit is completely open source, unless you want to use cloud kind of stuff, enterprisey stuff, and the sharing and team, all that kind of team stuff. But if not, everything's free. You can use the Bit cloud for free as well. So if you wanted to put your components onto the cloud, you can do that for free as well. If you want private ones, I think that's paid. But you can also just put them in your own Docker container and self-host them yourself. You can also just put them to NPM if you want and still use. So I've written a couple of articles about that as well. So yeah, it's open source, and do check it out. And I hope you build better software, and thank you very much. We have 8 minutes for questions. If anyone does have any questions, you can ask away. I will try and answer them. And if not, you can all go drink coffee. Yes, go ahead.
How do you actually implement the independent versioning of components?
How do you implement it? So how does it, how do you use it? Yeah, so basically, if you're working in the same workspace, so imagine the e-commerce product card component contains the currency component, right? They're in the same workspace. So if I modify the currency component, then when I tag that version of the currency component, I add the US dollar in there or whatever, then the product card will auto-update because it knows, because the dependency graph knows it kind of needs that new version, so the product card will get a new update. Now, if I'm working in separate code bases, so I've got the base UI, say the button component, and then the product card. I update the button. Now the product card needs the new update of the button. Now this is where you do have to kind of manually do it, just like you would manually do an NPM package update, which is not ideal, but we are working on something called Ripple CI, which we're using internally at the moment. It's not available yet, but it will be. And what this does is it kind of simulates across all your dependency graph where that component is being used, and simulates a kind of what it would look like. So I don't know if you use Netlify deploy previews, for example. I would kind of like, going by that. So you can see what it would look like if it was deployed, and then you can say, yes, and then it will like accept that pull request and, take that new version. So that's the kind of future thing that we're working on, which is very cool, and we're building with it internally. But at the moment, we've got to come on, you do like a bit import, and you import, and then basically update to version 2, which gives you control as well, because maybe you don't want to update to version 2 because, you saw my buttons are different in different applications. So you do want that control as well. But yeah, sometimes some of them has to be manually done, which is the way it is, but it's getting better. Good question. Anyone else? Any questions? Yes? What do I think of Module Federation? So we're working with Zachary Jackson, who built Module Federation, and we're putting Module Federation into bits, so you'll be able to build your components with Module Federation. What do I personally think of it? It depends on what you're doing and if you need it. Again, you're going into runtime versus build time. We also built something that allows you to actually turn an Angular component into a web component so that we can use it in a React application. I don't think you should do that. Do you want to do that? Do you need to do that? Maybe there are teams out there that are, taking AngularJS and they're literally migrating across to React, and therefore there are times when, that component is so complex that it's necessary. So it's all kind of opening up a whole can of worms when it comes into Module Federation and a runtime, build time, and etc. It depends on what you need. Depends on what you want to do. It's like when you talk about micro front ends, right? People are all saying, we need micro front ends. And we get so many people coming to us, we need micro front ends. And it's like, what problem are you trying to solve? We want teams to own features. Well, then you don't need micro front ends, as you call micro front ends with runtime and build time, etc. You just need to build independent components. So yeah, but we are implementing Module Federation, working with Zachary on that. So it's going to be interesting how it works, but we have everything's in Webpack 5 because Zach already put Webpack 5 in all our system, and that's all cool. So it's all set up, and it's just a matter of a couple of weeks before he finishes that. I know he has it working really well in Lullamon. I bought leggings in there in Canada last week in the shop he works in, and he has Module Federation doing great stuff in that. So he's working on that. It will be interesting to see how it goes in the future and what people do with it, and I'm interested to see what mess people make with their code base. I can see a lot of messes happening. but good question. Anyone else? Any questions? Batman. No? Okay, so my Twitter handle is Debs_Brian. My DMs are always open, so feel free to send me a message if you want to talk more about components, about taekwondo, about hitting your head off revolving doors, or anything else. Come and see me. I'm going to have ice cream. That's what I'm going to do. I don't know what you're going to do. There's one more talk left. I hope you really enjoy it. The party tonight's going to be amazing. If you've never seen the Line Breakers, do not miss it. It's going to be incredible. And enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone, and come and see if you need anything. Thank you very much.